Hi, how y'all doing? My name's Tyler. I'm the Vice President of the Winthrop College Republicans.
And I'm Leslie, and I'm the Secretary of Affairs here.
And today with us we have Ms. Sheri Few, who is a candidate running in the 5th District. So thanks for being here with us, Ms. Few.
Thank you for inviting me.
And our first question today is going to be just how did you first get involved in politics?
I think that's an interesting question. I've been involved with the Republican Party since I was about 25. I was recruited by a local Republican Party person and asked if I wanted to get involved, and actually started the Young Republicans Club there in Kershaw County. So I was kind of on the high end of the Young Republicans, but that's how I got started. And I've been involved with the local Republican Party ever since that time. And then through that engagement, I was asked if I wanted to consider an appointment through the governor's office. So I was appointed to the Council on Maternal, Infant, and Child Health. Then it was Governor Beasley who appointed me. So I had a couple of political appointments that led to more interest, and then I pursued office. I've run for the South Carolina State House. I've run for Superintendent of Education, and I did win a primary when I was running for State House. Did very well in the superintendent's race, and then now, of course, I'm seeking Congress.
Well, we're happy to have you here. Thank you.
What made you initially decide to run for Congress?
Well, it's a couple of things. My involvement in education, that's my key issue, and that's why I ran for State Superintendent of Education. And after that race, I began to communicate with people like myself around the country who had led the fight in their state against the Common Core standards. And I direct a nonprofit called South Carolina Parents Involved in Education. And after speaking with my colleagues around the country, we decided to expand our organization into a national organization. So for the last 3 years, I've been working with these colleagues, and we're under the name United States Parents Involved in Education. And our goal is to end the U.S. Department of Education and all federal education mandates. So what we realized as mom activists around the country that have been fighting to improve education was that we were really spinning our wheels in the states. We saw that we had similar experiences, and the same excuse that we would hear in our states was that we'll lose federal funding if we don't comply with the standards and the mandatory testing that are the enforcer for the standards. So we decided to take our fight to the feds. So that's where my focus has been for the last 3 years. And then when this seat became vacant, I recognized an opportunity, first of all, to lead this fight in Congress, because we really believe that there's no one in Congress that understands the problems with education. We desperately need someone that has my background and experience and can educate colleagues and lead the effort to do just as I said, to get the feds out of education and return local controlled education. In addition to that, we looked at the superintendent's race from 2014. And what we saw is that while I didn't win statewide, I did win the 5th Congressional District by more than 3,000 votes. So it seemed like a unique opportunity for me, and that's why I entered the race.
And so you highlighted education as an issue that's important to you, but what are some other issues that are important to you?
Well, I'm very interested in our country's security. I believe that the federal government's main responsibility is protecting and defending the people of the United States of America. So obviously in the last several years we have seen devastating attacks even here in our homeland. It started with 9/11. Nobody ever thought that we would be attacked in our own homeland. And then of course following that there have been many incidents right here that could have been avoided, I believe. So the security of our country is something I'm very interested in, and that's why I support President Trump's national security agenda, which is to increase military spending, to rebuild our military, to stand up to radical Islamic terrorism. And I especially am fond of his stay from immigration from countries that are known to be terrorist countries, and refugee resettlement, which is also a national security risk to our country. So I'm very interested in that. I'm strongly pro-life. I'm pro-Second Amendment. I like to brag about the fact that I have my concealed weapons permit, and I do carry, and I can outshoot most men, outside of my husband, that is. He's a pretty good shot. So those are issues that are important to me, and I think most conservatives.
You mentioned the 2014 race. How does that helping you transition into this race for 5th Congressional District?
Well, besides the obvious that I've already pointed out, that I did win the 5th Congressional District, and quite handsomely, actually. In addition to that, I have name ID. People are familiar with my name, and that's very important in elections. And people know my reputation from that race. In that race, I was the only candidate that said very bold things, just like I'm doing in this race. I ran a very aggressive campaign. I talked about liberal indoctrination that's happening in public schools. And, you know, I was running for the state's highest office in education, and for me to say things like that was very bold. And so people have seen the boldness that I have. They've seen that I'm a fighter. They've seen that I've led the grassroots initiative to make change in our state. And I think that that's what they're looking for in a representative for Congress.
So I want to be a teacher. I want to be a high school teacher when I graduate. And when I started researching your candidacy, I was just very impressed at all of your work that you've done at the state level and now trying to combat, federal education. So my question really is, does the federal government have a role in education?
No, not at all. It's unconstitutional. I'm sure you're aware that the Constitution delineates certain powers to the federal government, and everything that's not named in the Constitution is left to states. Education is not in there.
And so what do you think of, there were a lot of people, and especially in our classes, because we take poli-sci classes, and a lot of people were very upset, and even in education classes I take, with the nomination of, Betsy DeVos, people start going crazy saying she's going to defund all public schools and things like that. So just, I mean, what do you think of that sort of approach when it comes to the Department of Education?
Well, I think you're probably talking specifically about school choice, which has been a Republican plank of our platform for some time. In South Carolina, we haven't been very successful with school choice. It's been, at least the last 12 years that I've been involved, we've only made one baby step toward school choice. So we do have one program that is for special needs students, and it's a scholarship program. And that was thought to maybe open, put a crack in the dam and maybe open up more opportunities for parents to have choices about where their children attend school. The concept of school choice is really important because it is about parents having the authority to decide what's in the best interest of their child rather than being dictated to by the government. So people who are opposed to school choice will tell you, well, you can still do that. You can put your child in a private school or you can homeschool. You have other choices. But the thing is, our tax dollars are funding all of the public school children at a rate of nearly $12,000 per student. And it's very expensive to go to private school. So I was talking with a mother recently who called, and she's interested in my candidacy. And she has 6 children. Some are already graduated college, but she has a 9-year-old. So obviously she's got a big span between her kids. But she has put her 9-year-old in public school where all the others had gone to private school. So she was telling me how distraught she was about what they were learning and how it was contrary to their values. But the other option, the alternative, the private school is so expensive. Apparently the school that she chose for her children was I think she said $15,000 a year. So it's even more than what we're spending on our public school students. And so she thinks it's unfair, and so do I, and most conservatives agree, that parent can't take her tax dollars, the $12,000 or whatever is allocated per student in the state, and let it follow her child to the school of her choice. So that's the concept of school choice. Now, when it comes to Betsy DeVos, our national nonprofit supported her nomination, but we did it with some reservation, believe it or not, even though I'm a past proponent of school choice, and if you have enough time, I don't know if you'll edit some of this out, like April said I could go on these topics. Yeah. In the last few years, I've learned even to be wary of school choice. So the reason we approved her nomination with reservation was because she was actually a proponent of Common Core standards. She was on the Foundation for Excellence in Education, which is Jeb Bush's foundation that took $7 million from Bill Gates to promote Common Core. So our group was all involved with Common Core, and so we were very concerned about that. But we wrote a letter to the president and to the transition team saying that we would support her nomination because we believe that she was there to implement President Trump's agenda and not her own. Whereas a lot of activists around the country were in lockstep with the liberals and were opposing because of her involvement with Common Core. So she really faced some serious opposition from both sides of the aisle because of her involvement with Common Core. So we did support her, but the school choice issue that I was referring to earlier, and now I'm not 100% on board with school choice, is because until we get the federal government out of education, then the only real choice a parent has is what Common Core school will my child attend. Because if the money's following that child, that means the standards and the mandatory testing will also have to follow.
Yeah.
So until we get the federal government out, school choice is not really a choice.
Man, I thought that was really good. And I'd really love to get your take on magnet schools one day. And I really appreciate your fight for conservative values and values like that on the college campus. I had a buddy come up today, and he was kind of passing out literature, free market literature. And he was kind of alienated to a free speech zone on campus, a public university having a free speech zone. And, like, it's public ground, so the whole place has to follow the First Amendment. But it doesn't do that. And I think we need more people out there fighting for real principles on the college campus. But moving on to something out of the political realm, what is something about you that a lot of people don't know?
Well, I've recently been talking about the fact that when I was 16, I became pregnant and chose to have an abortion. And I haven't talked about that publicly previously. But I think it's an important issue, and I tell my testimony about my experience in an effort to demonstrate that women, 1 in 4, the statistics are, 1 in 4 have had an abortion. So many women like myself hid that and didn't share it with anyone, never spoke out about it, and it caused them to go into depression and sometimes medicate themselves because of their depression. And it was a devastating experience for me, and one that I hope to be able to help other women avoid by sharing my testimony. And one of the other circumstances related to my experience is that, people think that when an individual has been raped or when incest is involved, that it's okay to have an abortion then. And my experience says that that's not necessarily the case, that a child that is conceived through rape or incest is still a child and still a human being and deserves life. And the decision I made, I regretted, and it was very difficult for me to deal with. But as a result of my difficulties, I became active in the pro-life movement. And I started a crisis pregnancy center in my hometown. And I was on the board of directors, and the board decided that all the volunteers that have had an abortion, because many of the women that would come to us and volunteer their services had similar experiences like mine, and that motivated them to be involved. So we made it a requirement that volunteers had to go through a Bible study recovery program. It's a program called Forgiven and Set Free. So I was one of the first members of that class, and it was a tearful experience for me to go through all of that. I didn't realize that I still had pain bottled up. But it was a very healthy experience for me to go through that. And the study ended with the memorial service for my baby. So it was quite a moving time. And I am sharing that story now, again, to hopefully help other young women.
Well, we thank you so much for sharing that and all of your work that you're doing with the pro-life movement. We really, that's a blessing what you're doing, so thank you.
Thank you.
And a last question for you is, what is your message to younger voters? And us being college Republicans, we have to deal with people being sometimes being afraid of being conservative because they know what the liberal environment's like. So what would your message be to young voters?
Well, I would say hang in there for one thing. I mean, I'm really proud of what you guys are doing here on this college campus and your sponsor that you introduced me to earlier. And I know it's difficult, like the experience you were just describing a moment ago. And it's really maddening to me that the public-funded institutions are treating issues as though it's okay to, provide liberal indoctrination to students, but then conservative students aren't allowed to speak out, and they're relegated to free speech zones. It's very maddening to me. And as a member of Congress, I would do what I could to tie the federal funding that goes to universities that don't treat students fairly and pose the same threats that we've had with Common Core. If you're going to operate in an unconstitutional manner and unfair to students, then we're going to withhold your funding. So I encourage young people like yourself to hang in there, keep being courageous and bold and speaking about the things that are important, because we need you in the fight. We need young people. My daughter-in-law who's running my campaign has really learned a lot through the last several months that she's been hanging out with me, and I've been really proud to see how that influence has caused her to be bold among her friends, and I think it's going to make a difference in a lot of people's lives because she's willing to speak out.
Well, thank you so much for coming out and doing this interview with us today, and we're really looking forward to seeing you on Thursday for our forum. So thank you so much, Ms. Few.
All right, thank you.
so much.
Thank you.
All right, I enjoyed it.